Good morning. It's a rainy day outside, and I love to sleep on rainy days. I want to just make sure you're awake. Good morning. Okay, good. Hey, it's good to be with you this morning. Church family, it's always good to be together. If you're visiting with us this morning, maybe you're returning from visiting, or it's your first time here, you came with a friend or family or by yourself, we're really glad you're here. We're really thankful for your presence, and we would love to get to know you afterwards. This morning we start a new sermon series called I Am, Knowing Him and Discovering Us. And before we jump into that, I want to tell you a story about my friend Kirk, but first let me tell you about my friend Kirk so you kind of have an idea of who this guy is. He was born in Illinois, raised some of his life in Michigan. That's where he went to high school. Today he is in his low to mid 30s. He's a tall guy. He's 6'3". To some of you in here, that's normal size. To some of you in here, that's a giant. He's 6'3". He's a pretty fit guy. Like, he's not a musclehead, but he's also not like super slender. He takes care of himself. He's been married to his wife Julie for 10 years. They have 2 boys that he loves with all of his heart. And you can tell just by talking or meeting this guy, you can tell Kirk is a dad. Do you ever met someone like that where you just know they're a dad by the way they look or talk? He's not very flashy. Like, he has money, but he doesn't wear it, if that makes sense. Like, he's more Coles than Coach, if you get what I'm saying. But just when you talk to him and you spend some time with him and you get around him, you can tell he's a dad and he loves his kids. His faith is a huge part of his life. He talks about Jesus and his belief in him openly. It's one thing I really like about Kirk. And, well, I'll be honest with you, I don't know Kirk. I've actually never met Kirk. That's actually Kirk Cousins, the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I think everything I said is true. I think it is, but I don't actually know Kirk. I've never met Kirk. I've never talked to Kirk. It's going to be really weird if Kirk Cousins watches this sermon online, by the way. I think that's all true, but I don't know Kirk. I know a lot about Kirk based off what I Googled, but does that actually mean I know Kirk? I don't think so. This morning, there's one very real danger that we can face, and it's this. One real danger is that we can know about God, but not know God. In the same way I can know a lot about Kirk, it doesn't mean I know Kirk. In the same way you can know a lot about your favorite celebrity or musician or artist, you can still not know them. There's a big difference, right? And one real danger for you and I is that we can know about Jesus but not know Jesus. We can memorize the facts. We can remember part of the story. We can memorize verses but still yet not know Jesus. We can even know a Jesus who doesn't fit who Jesus truly is. It's interesting when you read the Gospels how it seems like every group of people, they seem to think they know Jesus, but they have some misunderstandings about him. That is not a problem only for the first century. We can know a Jesus who doesn't truly match who Jesus is. We live in a world where people have vastly different ideas and conclusions about Jesus, and it's possible we can be wrong too. I'll tell you, this danger is even true in Bible Belt America. Maybe even more so, where everyone kind of has an idea of Jesus, or many people grow up hearing or kind of knowing about Jesus, and we, if we're not careful, can know about him, but not really know him. And why does that matter? Well, it's because of the verse that was read to us earlier, in John chapter 17 and verse 3, where Jesus, as he prays to his Father in that upper room, said this is eternal life, that they know you, and the one whom you've sent, Jesus Christ. Not that they know kind of about you, but that they know you. And so it's really important that we know Jesus, because if we want to experience the new life now and after, it's only going to come by knowing Jesus. If you want to know somebody, what do? Well, if you want to know about somebody, do what I did for about an hour with Kirk and Google. But if you really want to know somebody, you go spend time with them. You listen to them. You let them share with you who they are. And that's what we plan to do in this series. We're going to go to Jesus' very own words to say, who is Jesus? Because we want to know him. In the Gospel of John, there are 7 I am statements that are recorded for you and I. They're similar in structure and in grammar, where he would say things like, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. He'd say, I am the door. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. He would say, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the vine, and you are the branches. He'd make these statements about himself, and they tell us about who he is so we can know him. And we're going to study those over the next coming weeks. But what's interesting about all of these I am statements is that in their language, there were 2 words that you could use to say I am. And he combines them both into verb form to where it literally might sound like, I am the bread of life. And you'd say, what's wrong with you? I am the light of the world. And in a way, what he's doing is he's calling back to an old encounter where God showed or revealed himself to Moses, where he would tell Moses, I am who I am. I don't think that would be lost on the first century hearers when he said, I am the bread of life. Are you really saying what you're saying? And so if you have your Bibles this morning or a device, look at Moses chapter 3. That's not a book. Look at Exodus chapter 3. Turn with me there, because before we jump into Jesus' statements over the coming weeks, as we strive to know him, who he is, I want us to go back to the very first time God said, I am. I am who I am. So look at Exodus chapter 3. And I'm going to try the rest of this sermon to not say Moses chapter anything. If you know your Old Testament at all, if you know the Bible story, at this point in time in Exodus, God's people have been enslaved. They are in captivity. They have been suffering for many years, and they have been groaning and crying out. In Exodus chapter 2 and verse 24 and 25, it says that God heard their groaning, that he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it says God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. He heard about their suffering. He knew of their suffering. He was going to do something about it, and his plan was to send a man in Moses to Egypt to work through him to free his people. Moses was a man who spent his first 40 years in Egypt as he was adopted in a very unique way. He spent his 40 years there. He flees it. He spends 40 years out just being a shepherd away, and then he'll be called back to Egypt eventually and spend the next 40 years with them as he frees these people and leads them. And so he's going to work through Moses to free his people. And how he does it is God appears to Moses, though, in a burning bush. It didn't consume the bush, but God yet appears, and he commissions in this moment Moses to go back to Egypt to free his people. Imagine that, meeting God in this moment. And what we see in this passage, or what we will see, is we learn a lot about God as he reveals himself to Moses. Would you pick up in verse 7 with me? It says, Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent. A little behind. This shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. And then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Do you notice that phrase? That sounds a lot like the New Testament phrases where he would say, I am. If they ask me who you are, what in the world do I say? Who do I call you? And God actually gave him a name to say. He would say, I'm Yahweh. I am who I am. And there's a lot in here about God that you could learn, but I don't want us to miss the forest for the trees, the fact that God has a name. God has a name. That means a few things for us that we need to understand before we even talk about trying to know Jesus. And the first one is this: God is personal. God has a name. You know, a name is personal. You've probably noticed this maybe. If not, I'm telling on myself. But as I've tried to get to know you, I have to remember your name, right? The cheat code in the church for if you can't remember someone's name is what? You just call them brother or sister. But does it mean a little bit more when someone remembers your name? Or when they know your name? There's something about a name that is just personal. Like when you, as a mother, when you named your child, or when someone calls out your name like, hey, John, it means something. God has a name. That says something about who he is, and it means he's personal. He says, I am who I am. And there's more throughout this text that shows us he's personal. Look at some of these. Did you see them? In verse 7 and verse 9, he sees their affliction, their suffering, what they're going with. He says, I see it. He said, I've heard it. I've heard your cries. As you've called out and cried out and prayed and you've groaned, he says, I've heard. God says, I know. It's also in chapter 3 and verse 7. I know. I understand. I know. God says he cares. In verse 8 and verse 10, he says, I'm going to do something about this. I care enough to be active in the lives of people, to be active in your life. He says, I care enough to do something about it. God's personal. He keeps showing it. He remembers. I made a promise long ago to your forefathers about you people, my covenant people. I, make a promise. I give my word, but I keep my word. He's personal. He's present. When Moses is thinking of all of these excuses, he would go on to list a total of 5 of them. The first one is, how can I do this? Who am I? And he says, don't worry about who you are. He says, I will be with you. That's a God who's present, and he's personal. He has a name. The Pew Research Center, that's a Christian study group, a research group. They research across the country, trying to gauge where people's spirituality is, what they're believing in. And last December, just a few months ago, they discovered 9 out of 10 Americans believe in a higher power. 54% believe in God as described in the Bible. There are a lot of people who believe in an idea of God, just some higher being. Whether that's something beyond this life, they believe in that there's something that's supernatural, but they couldn't tell you what it is. They believe something is out there, but they don't believe a God who's personal. They don't believe the God who's described in the Bible, the one that we're worshiping this morning. And so while many people believe there is a God, not many people believe, or as many people believe, there is a personal God. It said even 22% of atheists believe in some higher power or spiritual force in the universe. I know that might not make sense with the definition of atheist, but that's how atheists themselves answered that. 1/5 of them believe in some higher power or some force. There is an upside and a downside to believing in a higher power. Not in a personal God, but just in a higher power. The upside to that is that whatever it is, it's amoral. What I mean by that is it makes no ethical demands on anybody. If you just believe in a higher power, it demands nothing from you. You can live however you want. It won't ask you to do anything. It won't force you to behave or live in a certain way. It says nothing. It sees nothing. It knows nothing. It's just out there. I say it for a reason. It's just whatever it is. But there's a downside to just believing in a higher power, and that's that there is nobody to turn to. There's nobody home. It's impersonal. You have no one to help you, no one to save you, no one who can redeem you. You have no relationship with an it. You just can't. That's not the God who revealed himself to Moses, is it? No, he's not an it. He's an I am. The creator of the universe, the self-existent, always been, always will be God of the Bible. He's different. He's a divine being. He's a person. He's relatable. Have you ever thought about that when it comes to God, that he's relatable in ways? Listen, one of my favorite phrases is, it is what it is. You ever said that when things are going wrong in your life? It is what it is. God does not say that about himself. He's not an it is what it is God. He's an I am who I am. I'm a being. And I think one thing we need to understand off the bat from this encounter with Moses is that God is personal. Now, we'll tell why that's important here in a few minutes, but he's personal. He's a God with a name, with a people who's living and active in the lives of men. But secondly, he's knowable. God is knowable. Throughout the history of mankind, God has shown himself in some way or fashion. He's revealed himself so that man could know him. In the beginning, Adam and Eve walked amongst who? God, so that they could what? Know him. When they sinned and the whole world started to fall apart, it seemed, God continued to speak to Cain and Abel because God wanted them to know him. God spoke to the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because he wanted them to know him. God spoke through the prophets so that they and the people could know him. God came to earth and became flesh and dwelt among us, John would say at the beginning of his gospel, so that people could know him. God has recorded all of these words for you and I so that we could know him, not know about him, but to know him. God's knowable. And if God has made himself knowable, it's because he wants us to know him. I know that seems basic, but he wants a relationship with us. It's not a distant person. It's not like you're calling somebody and it's a one-way conversation with no one listening on the other side. He wants a relationship. Try to wrap your head around that for a moment and struggle to. The eternal, powerful being who has always been and who will always be, who created all things visible and invisible, wants to know you, a temporary, powerless, created being. He wants to know you. He wants to know me. I grew up in a Christian home. I know there's going to be many of you in here who did as well. I was raised from the beginning of my life being told that there is a God, that he came to earth as Jesus, that the Bible is his inspired words, and that's just what I believed growing up. At some point in my life, that was tested. I had to determine if I believed that to be true, if I trusted in that. Spoiler alert, I do. Maybe you're like that too. But if you grow up like me believing that there is a God and his name is Jesus and that these are his words, maybe you're like me in the sense that maybe you've overlooked how wonderful of a blessing it is that God has made himself known. He didn't have to do that. God is knowable. An eternal God has revealed himself to mankind. That's remarkable. And so while many today believe in a God who's distant and dark, unclear and unseen, that is not the God we worship. Our God is personal and knowable, and he wants a relationship with you and I. But unlike me knowing about Kirk Cousins, or unlike what it seems to be every woman under the age of 45 knows everything about Taylor Swift, he doesn't just want you to know about him, he wants you to know him. That takes more than knowing facts. Facts are good. It takes more than simply knowing a few things. It takes listening to him. It takes being with him. It takes pursuing him. In the same way that you build a relationship in real life, you build a relationship with God in that way. It's a relationship because he's personable. And he's personal and knowable. How can you have a relationship with somebody you don't know? How can you put your faith in somebody you don't know? See, that's the danger if you just know about him but don't know him. It's really hard. I would imagine there's not many people, if any, in your life you put your trust in that you don't know. Or that you wouldn't describe as a close personal relationship if you don't know them. And so this morning we start with just this simple moment with Moses, because if we're going to know Jesus, we have to believe that our God actually is personal and knowable, that we can draw closer to him, that we can come to know who Jesus is and have him change our life, not just knowing about what he's done, but knowing who he is. You know, church, what we might be missing more than we realize is an understanding of who God is. In our rush to tell people, hey, here's how you're saved. In our rush to tell people, hey, this is a sin and that's a sin, and here's how you live a Christian life, what we might be missing is simply saying, this is who Jesus is. And this is the one person who will change you as you get to know him. We can't forget to reveal who God is. Isn't that the biggest question there is? Who are you? So we have to start focusing on the character of God and who he is. And that's what we're trying to do in this series in the weeks coming forward. Because if we don't know him, there's no way to really be changed by him. And as we start to close, I'll ask you, I forgot about that slide. That's true though, by the way. Hey, many people know that God is. The studies show that. There are some that don't. But many people know that God is, but not many know who. Well, we got to focus on who he is. And so this morning, I would just ask you a couple questions as we close. Is God personal to you? Is he personal to you? Do you know God, or do you know about God? Do you know him? Do you know Jesus, or you just know, I know he was born, and I know he lived, and I know he died, and I know he resurrected. Like, that's important. You got to know that. That's part of the gospel. But do you know him? Do you believe that he's a God who sees and hears and knows you? Do you believe he cares and remembers what he said to you? Do you believe he's present in your life, or does God always seem far away? See, that might be a good indication. If God always seems like something just very far away, that might be an indication he's not very personal to us. Let me ask you this, do you pray? You know, one great indicator of if we really believe God is personal and knowable is, do we pray? And when we pray, do we feel like we're talking to nobody? Do we feel like we're talking to that person who can't really hear and we're just talking to ourselves? Or do we actually think there's somebody listening and who's responding in his own way? If that's the case, it might be we have a wrong idea of God. Is God knowable to you and I? If he is, are we pursuing a relationship with him? I would imagine, ladies, that what you really desire from your husband is that the moment you guys said, I do, that he stopped trying to get to know you better. I imagine that's what you really wanted. No, we're good. We got it, and we're settled. The relationship is good and finalized. The contracts have been written and signed, and we're done with this whole getting to know each other thing. That's what you wanted, right, women? That's what you're looking. No, apparently not. Okay, silence. Do we treat God that way? To where I've kind of known enough, as much as I can know, there's no more to know, and that's it. You know, let me ask you this. Do we read our Bible? And if we do we read it like a study guide where we're trying to get all the answers to the test? Or do we read it like an exploration into a divine being in person? Like, the more I read this, I learn about a being, not simply I just learn this is the answer to this and this is the answer to that, but that this is about a person. Because if we read it like a study guide, that might be an indication that God's not very personal or knowable to us. You know, it's very possible for us to have some of these misunderstandings that others have as well. If you believe he's personal and knowable, are you pursuing a better understanding and relationship with him? It's my prayer that through this series, we will come to know better who God is by going straight to Jesus. And I believe when we do that, we'll actually better understand ourselves. Somebody said this, and I really like it. They said, we never know who we are until we know who he is. Moses asked two questions essentially right there in that text we read. It was number one, who are you? But did you catch the second one? Who am I? When you're in the presence of God, when you come to know who he is, the self-existent, eternal creator, you start to question, well, who really am I? So you can't really understand yourself until you understand who God is. And so my prayer is as we learn about Jesus and we come to better know who he is, we'll also better understand ourselves. I know I hate introductory lessons to things. Let's just get into it. But I think it's important that we spend a moment and just say, is God personal and knowable to you and I? If you want to know God, I pray this series will help you. If you want to know God and you want the life that comes from that relationship with him, this is a church that would love to help you. That's our mission, to help people come to know Jesus. And today is a great day to start a relationship with him. Today is a great day to recommit or reinvest in your relationship with God. Today is a great day to restart your pursuit of him, because we have a God who's personal and knowable, and he wants nothing more than you to pursue him and to know him. And there's nothing more important that you and I can do in our life than to pursue and know him. If you don't know where to start, if you don't know where to start again, we would love to help you today. I'll tell you this though, when you come to know God, you will never be disappointed. You ever met somebody that maybe you thought was going to be great and you were disappointed? That's not true with God. You'll always be in awe and in admiration and be thankful you got to know him more. This morning, if you need to respond, maybe you need to start a relationship with him, to reinvest in it, or maybe you're simply saying, I don't really know who God is and I want to learn. We'd love to help you this morning right now while we stand and while we sing.